Greetings, 2%ers. So we've got another diagnostic video, an interesting one, I believe, given our last series that we had on the channel. But before I begin, I want to give a shout out to my friend Mike over here at the Disgruntled Mechanic channel. Thank you for the Christmas present. Give you a look here. Interesting channel over there. Mike is my favorite 98%er in sheep's clothing. He initiated the channel, I believe, under the little bit of sort of antagonism on some of the diagnostic philosophy that we have on this channel. But over time, I can tell you one of the more recent videos that I saw on his channel, he was doing the diagnosis using a 4-channel oscilloscope. So really interesting to see that progression over time, kind of like we've done with electrical on this channel, actually. And he's also a really entertaining guy. He's kind of fun to watch. So I'll put a link to his channel. You might want to give it a little look over there. And speaking of disgruntled mechanics, what we're going to do is look at this 2010 Chrysler Sebring, which has, for those of you guys that have been following the series, here's the symptoms. It has a really hard time starting when it's really cold outside in the morning. And then after it gets started, it runs perfectly fine. Okay, so if you guys haven't been following along, this is the symptom we had on that Toyota in the last series, which turned out to be a blown head gasket, despite the fact that it passed leak down and compression test. So one of the things that you would do is think, given those symptoms, oh, maybe it's got a blown head gasket. Of course, that's what they do in the forums and chat rooms and everything, just because you saw it before. We're not going to do that, although I will tell you a very quick, interesting story. That Toyota that we had in the last series that did end up having a blown head gasket, although the compression test did not detect it. The leak down test, however, did detect it when the engine was warm. I believe that was the case at the time. It definitely passed the leak down test when the engine was cold, though. But here's the thing. The guy that sent me the customer is also a customer of mine. He's actually a chiropractor, so he sees a lot of people. And occasionally when they have a conversation about a car issue, he recommends me. So he recommended just a couple days ago another customer that had the same symptoms on, I think it was a 2005 Toyota, maybe it was 4Runner, exact same engine as this lady had with the last series we did. And the exact same system. The guy says when he starts the car in the morning for about 20 seconds, it chuggles, it runs rough, runs perfectly fine the rest of the day, and it doesn't always happen. And he said that he had a check engine light code for a P0306, misfire cylinder number 6. Unbelievable. Of course, I went out there and I didn't have the chance to film at the time. The guy was right there with me. He's kind of a little bit of a gearhead. And guess what? I can tell you, first thing I did, compression test passed perfectly fine, all cylinders, actually had higher compression than the previous car. Did a leak down test, this is all with the engine cold. Leak down test, I let that leak down test go a long time, nothing. It was perfectly fine. Started the car up and I can tell you it chugged for about 20 seconds. We pulled the plug out. You could actually see steam in the number 6 cylinder. As I confirmed with a borescope that I brought, obviously I came prepared on this one. And we let the engine warm up, and then after letting the engine warm up, did compression test perfectly fine. Did the leak down test, the leak down test bubbled the coolant over, all in number 6 there. So same exact engine, same symptom, same diagnosis, blown head gasket, affecting the cylinder number 6, compression test perfectly fine, both with engine warm and cold. Go figure. Anyway, so well, that's the symptoms with this car. Same symptoms with this car, but a little bit different actually. So the difference is this guy says a couple of differences. First of all, there's no check engine light. Second of all, he says that the period of time that the car was running rough was easily a couple of minutes, and then he just gave up, didn't feel comfortable. It had never happened to him before, and he says it hadn't happened to him since. So he dropped the car off to me just a few minutes ago. I asked him if there was any issues this morning. He said no. He dropped it off in my driveway. I just started the car to pull it up into the garage here, and I can tell you it started right up, no symptoms. So Another one of these things. Not quite sure which direction we're going to go. We're going to try to get that out of our mind, thinking that it's a cylinder head just because my last 2 cars had a cylinder head gasket. That would be stupid reasoning. So we're just going to collect data like my friend Mike would do, and we're just going to see where we go. So let's get started. Oh, and by the way, another reason to be a disgruntled mechanic that I have is a surprise I have for you at the end of this video. So make sure you stay tuned to the end of the video, and I've got a little surprise for you I'd like you to check out. So let's get started on this car, see if we can figure it out. All right, let's see what we got to work with here. Got a 2.4 liter, this will be 4-cylinder, and one of the first things I'm noticing, plastic intake manifold right there. Again, that's just to increase my variables list of prospects. Let's see. Wow, this is pretty simple. Ooh, check it out. Ignition system. For those of you guys on the paid channel, here, check this out. Those of you guys over following the diagnosis and understanding of ignition systems on the other channel, let me just give you a real quick look here. See if you can identify, just by looking, this type of ignition system, and you can draw a wiring diagram of this right in your head, knowing exactly how it works, I bet. All right, and I just remembered my Trans Am actually has a 4-wire coil system, so we'll actually look at that in the next video in that series so that we can continue our understanding of those systems. What I wanted to do here is just look at the intake manifold is all, because I'm trying to build my list of potential variables that we're going to eliminate. One of them is definitely going to be vacuum leak, given the description of the symptoms with hard start when it's cold and then it smooths out. We've seen that a lot on this channel, so just one possibility. Let's get on the scan tool, see if we can find some evidence to support it. All right, you can hear it starts right up, no problem. Engine seems very smooth. Let's go ahead and get our scan tool set up, see if there's anything that we can find. I can tell you there's no check engine light on right now. All right, while this loads, I'm thinking of other possibilities. Fuel pressure could certainly be a variable. Could have any number of electrical problems with various sensors, whatever. All right, looking at our codes list, we have no diagnostic codes. So again, this is kind of a one-time event. I'm kind of thinking possible also electrical could explain it. All kinds of things. We're going to get some data to help narrow this down. So first thing, let's just see if we're warmed up or not. Yeah, we're 180 degrees. All right, I hear my disgruntled mechanic friend Mike saying, let's check fuel trim. Of course, Mike, that's what every 2%er would do first in this situation. Let's look at the long term. It looks really good. Short term. Okay, so we got a total trim of probably about 5 or so on average. A little bit jumpy on that short term. This is a drive-by-wire model. One tip for you guys too, if you're suspecting vacuum leak, which at this point, I'm not expecting a vacuum leak now. I'm not expecting that there's a vacuum leak at this time. But if you do have a situation where you believe that you've got a vacuum leak, and especially when it is in open loop, so you're not going to be able to see it on your fuel trims at the time, you can look at your throttle position on a drive-by-wire, or better yet, an IAC, idle air control valve, on a non-drive-by-wire. And basically on a vacuum leak condition, the engine is going to detect that that air-fuel mixture is not correct, and it's going to try to restrict the air intake by closing that idle air control and limit it. So if you see your idle air control at 0 steps, that's a pretty good indication that you've got a vacuum leak. Typically you're going to see it somewhere between 30 and 120 or so, depends, but it'll restrict the airflow on a vacuum leak by stepping down that IAC count. I don't see it on here. It looks like, oh, there we go, absolute throttle position. Okay, 12%, which is not indicative, again, of vacuum leak. If we were in a vacuum leak situation, especially a closed loop, I would expect that we would have a much tighter throttle position there, closer 1-2%, maybe even 0, as it's really trying to correct for that condition. So looking at these numbers right now, vacuum leak is not indicated. All right, well, not really suspecting a map problem given the correct barometric pressure and the intake manifold pressure at idle right now. Really not looking like a vacuum leak at this point. Let's try putting this under load and seeing what happens. All right, because this is drive-by-wire, I had to relocate the computer over by the driver's side. Really easy to do with my wireless auto ingenuity, which is definitely my scan tool of choice. All right, let's see what we got. We got our coolant temperature. We got our short-term and long-term trims here. Really not indicative of vacuum leak at this point. We've got our intake manifold pressure. Just going to test map sensor real quick as we've done in previous videos. Got ignition timing on here. That could be a variable. Throttle position, also a variable in case we have some electrical issue with throttle position. Also looking at possibility with fuel pressure, but I can't pull up a fuel pressure pit on the scan tool. We'd have to measure that if we suspect it. And engine RPMs down here so you can follow along. So let's pump this thing up a little bit and see what happens. Going to bring the RPMs about 2,500. All right, we see our fuel trim goes quite a bit negative, actually. Look at our long term. Okay, that's pretty interesting. If we noticed when we increased the RPM, the long term drove up pretty high. Short term went negative. Okay, looking at the map right here, we're looking for response to vacuum variables. So we've got vacuum highest on decel, second highest at idle. When I increase, should jump up to about atmospheric, then have the highest vacuum, and then stable out to where it was before at idle. Try that one more time. Okay. All right, map sensor I am not worried about. I'm eliminating that. All right, I'm also going to eliminate the ignition timing. I don't suspect a problem on that either. Definitely some response on the fuel trim under load, though. That's interesting. And it looked like there was a high long-term demand, but at the same time it was being corrected by the short term. So that is a little bit harder to explain. Let's try that again. Okay, that's pretty interesting. So kind of have an idea of what's going on here, and this will be a little bit new for you guys, but this is going to have to do with what I've called strategic fuel trim mapping strategy. And what it is that you can see that given different parameters such as the different RPMs, we have vastly different fuel trims. So this really isn't indicative to me of a live response. This is indicative to me of sort of a memorized cell response. I'll put a link to that video with the strategic fuel maintenance and strategy. And what I believe is happening here is, let's go up to about 1,500. Okay, and you can see that we actually go a little bit negative on the short term, if anything. And that's kind of a little bit indicating possible vacuum leak to me. Now let's go up to about 2,500. You can see that there's memory in the long term to add fuel. Let's try that one more time. Let's go up to 4,000. Okay, you see at 4,000, we have no long-term adjustment memory there, but of course, how often are you going to create a learned condition for your fuel cell strategy where you're idling at 4,000. Now there is one where you'd be idling at 1,800 to 2,200. And that would be on initial startup. And now I can't reproduce it. There it is. What I believe we may have evidence of there is memory of a vacuum leak. See how it's short term is compensating for that long term at this point? So when you look at our total fuel trim, it's 0, but at one time there was memory in the long term for a 17% fuel trim adjustment. All right, let me see if I can run through that fuel cell strategy grid and get a little more evidence of this. And again, you'll want to watch that video. It's a little bit of an advanced video. It's kind of dry, but I even made mention in the video that it probably would be very unusual, if ever, that it would come into play in diagnostics, but it actually is coming into play now. See if we can run through this curve here. There we go. Maybe I'll pause that in the video, and what we're looking at is what I believe is evidence of a correction on the adaptive fuel learn strategy, where at one point there was a long-term adaptive fuel learn set for fuel addition, supposedly for a vacuum leak, I'm suspecting, and we can see that now our live short-term correction is compensating for that because we don't have a vacuum leak under that condition at this time now, under those RPMs. Usually temperature is also taken into that grid as well, and you know, the engine temperature would have been very cold at the time, but I'm not exactly sure how the programming works, whether it maintains that cell that's learned across all parameters for a specific RPM. I don't know. But anyway, more on that in that video that I was talking about. But based on what I'm seeing here, while there isn't one now, I believe that this car has the intake manifold leak on really, really cold weather, that plastic intake manifold phenomenon. All right, I'm also keeping in mind that this car appears to be a speed density design as well. So map sensor dominant, actually map sensor only. And I am going to say that my first suspicion, while it's not showing now, my first suspicion is that there is evidence of vacuum leak. One thing that I can do to prove this, that I'm sometimes successful with, because I don't want to wait until tomorrow. I don't want to leave the car until tomorrow, because the issue I'm having is that we're having very mild weather this weekend in Denver, and I'm probably not going to be able to catch it as well. And also I want to get this guy a diagnosis. So what we're going to do is I'm going to set up a graph here, and let's get this coolant temperature out of here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set up just a couple of tests here. We're going to set up the live adaptation with short-term trim there, and then also let me pull in an oxygen sensor. So let's do O2 sensor 1. And let me set this up where we can see it with the engine. All right, so we've got our short term in blue, we've got our O2 sensor in red, and what I'm going to do is get some brake clean. All right, and the strategy is I'm going to spray some brake clean along the intake manifold where I suspect there would likely be the leak. And what we're going to do is see that, of course, we're going to get the response on the fuel trim going negative, while the O2 sensor is going to jump really rich. So we got two ways of measuring this. And the thing is, even though I don't have evidence of a vacuum leak through the fuel trim right now, there may be enough of a vacuum leak at the intake manifold that we can still detect it. Remember, we are seeing a fuel trim total of somewhere around 5 to 6 or so. Not enough that it even affects the engine, but again, enough that if it's at the intake manifold, that would be a suspicion that when the car is cold, that leak is going to be exacerbated tremendously. So let's go ahead and give this a try. I'm going to spray this, let's take a look here, right along here. Oh, did you hear the engine stumble? And look at that. Yeah, there's definitely an intake leak on this car for sure. Going rich on that O2 sensor. Fuel trim went way negative. Keep in mind our scale here, okay? Keep in mind our scale. Let me adjust this scale, and we're going to exacerbate this tremendously. So let's configure this scale. We're going to go minus 25 to 10. All right, and that's going to exacerbate the response on the graph. Oh, the engine totally stumbles. There we go. There's a good view of it. This engine has a vacuum leak at the intake manifold, no question about it. Now, what's interesting is how responsive this is, and yet our fuel trims are actually pretty reasonable. Let's go back to our live data. What happened to my long term? Yeah, we've got fuel trims still, well, our short term is still adjusting, but fuel trim's under 10, which I've always said is not anything to worry about, and it isn't. Unless you've got it in combination with other symptoms, which we have. Let's go back to our graph one more time. Yeah, long-term trim isn't going to change. That's in green. It will after a while when it learns. Oh, that's a definite. Yeah, you can see our reaction with that. Eventually it would be learned by the long term. Again, that's that adaptive fuel learn strategy. Now we're correcting back up again. That's the problem, I'm going to say, with this guy's car. If it's really cold, then he's going to have a fairly significant intake manifold leak that is going to cause the symptoms he described. So no head gasket here on this car. Well, I guess there could also be a head gasket problem, but there's definitely an intake manifold problem for sure. And that's what I'm going to tell him we need to start with. We got to fix that before we can make any other judgment. Let's see if this is stabled out here, and then here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and hook up my smoke machine on here, and we're going to see if we can detect this with the smoke machine with the engine warm, and then I will let the car sit because I won't be able to work on it till tomorrow to replace this intake gasket anyway. And then first thing tomorrow, we'll repeat the smoke machine, and we will see if it's any worse than what it is when the car's warm. That would be really strong evidence. That would be conclusive that that's exactly what happened with this guy's car. Looks like we're stable here. Let's go back to our live data. And you can see, you would look at this and just say, well, not even worried about a vacuum leak because we're under 10 total trim at idle. But you got to take it in consideration with other evidence, guys. Let's go ahead and set up that smoke machine. All right, let's see. Always got to figure out on every engine how you're going to seal off your intake. And looks like we got a PCV here. That's going to be a problem too. All right, that's a fat hose. That hopefully is pinching off. Let me get another one just to be sure. There we go. And I usually like to go through the brake booster. There we go. And let's see if we can find something to block off this intake. All right. The kit that I'm using is a Cornwell professional leak detector, and I got this from a mechanic that actually, unfortunately, had a really bad drug problem and was selling everything. And I got a whole complete kit with all kinds of adapters and everything off him. Kind of felt a little bad for him, but you know, people make their own decisions on how they address their challenges, and something we'll talk about on the surprise at the end of the video, by the way. Oh, I need compressed air. Okay, give me a second, got to get some compressed air. Okay, got our smoke going here. And let's see if we detect anything. All right now I don't see anything, and I don't suspect to. Again, we don't believe that we have a very significant vacuum leak right now. We know we have enough that it's sucked in some fuel vapors, but that may not be enough that we'll see it very clear on a smoke test yet. Let's see. I'm going to look right around where I sprayed, and if I see anything, I'll give you a look. And I can tell you I don't see anything yet. Let me go ahead and crank this thing up, put some really high pressure there, and really try to drive some smoke out. Okay, this is with the machine cranked up about as high as I can get it. And there you go. You can see some wafts of smoke. It's a little bit hard to pick up on the camera, I believe. Hopefully. Looks like it's coming from one runner, actually. Let's see if we can look in here. Well, I am afraid that may not be showing up in the camera. Trying to get a dark background. But there is a little bit of smoke coming out from there, and I can tell you in my experience, when this engine is cold, you're going to definitely see it. There we go. There's a little bit of a view of it in the camera. I know that's catching. That's coming off of, looks like only one runner. There's a little bit over on this last runner over here. You can see just a little bit of it. That's enough that it's going to suck in that brake cleaner, but that is not enough that it's going to affect the fuel trim dramatically. So what we are going to do is let this car sit overnight, repeat this smoke test. I can promise you it's going to be a dramatic difference. All right, with the engine really cold, you can definitely see we have the right diagnosis here. There is a significant stream of smoke. Let's see if we can catch it on camera here. All right, there we go. Good look at it there. This is coming from the upper intake, the plenum. And it's actually leaking in multiple places. If we go up top here, if we look in this valley, we can see it's completely filled with smoke. Get some of that out of there. We can see it's leaking over here as well. It's leaking multiple places. There's a good look there. That's a pretty substantial intake manifold leak on this plenum here. This plenum real easy to change, as you can see. It's about as easy as it would get. So very simple repair. Should be done with that in a couple hours. All right, what do you think of that, Mike? So again, it's not 100% conclusive that the issue that caused the symptom with this car was this intake leak. We just know 100% for certain that there is a pretty significant intake leak on this car that is definitely exacerbated quite substantially when the engine is cold. We saw that with the difference with the smoke test. So any way you look at it, this car needs an intake manifold, if nothing else, to reduce our baselines to zero and eliminate variables so that if there were other causes, which I really don't think there are, but this is going to be my call on it. Obviously, you could also do things like compression test, fuel pressure test, which some I may do as I dismantle the engine. This intake manifold's really easy, though, as you can see, so don't really have to do a whole lot. But given the symptoms and given what I have here, I may do, I don't know, I don't trust my compression test as much anymore. I may do some other things just to rule out if there's other variables involved. But the bottom line is, scientifically, we know we have a definitive variable that can cause those symptoms. That has to be eliminated. So I'm replacing this gasket, and then we'll go from there. And that gets to our surprise for the end of the video. So one of the things you guys who follow the channel and pay attention a lot, you know that I really do my best to help handicapped people out a lot. I have a very, very sensitive disposition towards people who have more struggles through life. And one reason is because there is a company, one of my largest customers actually, Amgen, the drug company, that produces an incredible medication that actually has changed my life and actually, quite honestly, prevented me from being disabled. And I've worked with Amgen to help other people to become aware of this disease, this condition, which is a autoimmune condition called psoriatic arthritis, which you can imagine doing mechanical stuff and having arthritis really can suck. And I did a project with Amgen, as I often do, going around talking to patients and doctors and even their customer service to help people understand about this condition. And we actually put a commercial together that will be available in certain areas. I'm going to put a link in the description to this commercial. I would like you to watch it, and especially if you know anybody that is suffering from arthritis, make sure you send it to them. The point of it is to help them make better decisions with their doctor to maximize their opportunity for relief with their condition, whatever that would be. So do me a favor, check out that link, and let me know what you think. And in the meantime, I am going to use my abilities to fix this car for this guy. So thanks for watching. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. We will see you next time. Oh, and you guys on the paid channel, don't forget I put 2 or 3 new videos up for the diagnosis and understanding of ignition systems. So go check it out. All right. See you later, guys.